You're listening to the Grassroots Church podcast. We're a Jesus-centered community in Thunder Bay, Ontario. You can learn how to participate more by going to our website at grassroots.church.
And I am going to be reading from Lamentations. Lamentations 3:17 to 18. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. And from Jeremiah 33:14 to 16. The day will come, says the Lord, when I will do for Israel and Judah all the good things I have promised them. In those days and at that time, I will raise up a righteous descendant from King David's line. He will do what is just and right throughout the land. In that day, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will live in safety. And this will be its name, the Lord of our righteousness.
So friends, we are once again beginning of the Advent season, and we are on our way to celebrating the literal birth of the gospel represented in the person of Jesus. And as many of you know, Advent is a season of preparation and anticipation, and it has sort of a dual focus. Looking back, so we remember and we celebrate the birth of Jesus that took place 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. But then we also look forward and anticipate his second coming when he will return in glory to bring his kingdom to fullness. And so since about the 4th or 5th century, Christians all around the world have been practicing this season of anticipation, this season of preparation, every year at this time leading up to the birth of our Savior. And so this morning we are joining in the throngs of Christians all around the world in this tradition. And it's kind of a cool thing when we think about it that way, isn't it? So Advent, of course, we said this morning with the children, revolves around 4 themes. There they are. Good. It's hard to not see the screen, so I'm never sure. We need like a monitor up there, but that's okay. We'll deal with this. So hope, peace, joy, and love. And so during this season, we reflect on these gifts that God has given us. The gift of hope that sustains us, a peace that comforts us, joy that carries us, and a love that transforms us. Oh, back one? Too many. And a love that transforms us. And so I'm calling this year's series A Weary World Rejoices, because we are a weary world. Are we not? Kate Bowler, who is an author and speaker, and she's a professor at Duke University, she put together this resource for pastors under the same sort of need. She does this every year for Advent. It's wonderful. And this year's theme, this year's sort of thing is called A Weary World Rejoices. So sort of borrowing it from her. But who could tell me what this line comes from, A Weary World Rejoices? Who knows their carols off the top of their head and be like, oh, that's this song. Angela? Hey? Oh, Holy Night. Did anyone else know that? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, we're in good company here. So yes, Oh, Holy Night. Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. I love that line. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices. I had to go with the Christmas colors there. So Bowler says that this season, and maybe you can relate to this, finds us, many of us, spiritually or emotionally or mentally sort of left on empty. I wonder if that's our case this morning. And so I want to just very briefly, if you'll humor me, just practice kind of taking an inventory of where we are at spiritually, emotionally, what our posture is as we enter this season. So I'm going to ask everyone in this room. It's not going to be awkward. Don't worry, it won't be awkward. I'm going to ask us all, though, to close our eyes. I'm going to just read a few questions to you, and I want us to just stop. I'm going to just wait 15 seconds maybe, and then I'll ask these questions. But as we seek to prepare our hearts, not just for this message this morning, but for this whole season. Like, this is a big thing that we're entering into, and we do this every year. And sometimes it catches us, and we're like, oh, what just happened? It just hits us like a blur. And so I want to avoid that this year, and I want to just take stock of where we're at as individuals. So if your eyes are closed, let me just pause for 10 seconds. Take a deep breath. maybe another one. So let me ask you this morning with your eyes closed, are you feeling joyful anticipation this year? Is excitement starting to build as you draw near to Christmas? Or maybe you're feeling angst. Have the very real worries of this world slowly and relentlessly been gnawing at your soul? Whether it is here in Canada, whether it's stuff that's going on in the States, conflict in the Middle East, Ukraine war, I don't know, maybe there's so many challenges and they don't have simple answers. And maybe that's just like particularly heavy this Christmas. Are you, in fact, weary? Maybe the circumstances in your own life, family, work, relationship drama, whatever it is it just causing you to want to just tap out, to kind of get off the next stop, sit by? I'm wondering if there is a deep sadness, perhaps, that you are feeling. Maybe you can't even point to the source of that sadness, but maybe it's just a little bit of everything. An uncertain future, a frustrating present, a regretful past. Okay, friends, open your eyes. If you're like me, maybe it's a mix of all of these emotions. Maybe there is joyful anticipation for Christmas, but I, for one at least, am holding on to a healthy dose of despair this year. And I put a lot of thought into it this week as I was preparing, and I can't really put my finger on one specific thing. Is it the online vitriol that is out there? Is it just the polarization, the division that is so obvious in our society, where friends are no longer able to speak to friends because of differences in ideology, differences in convictions, differences in values, or family members are not talking to each other? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's the global conflicts that we mentioned there. Maybe it's closer to home, some of the addictions, challenges in our own community. I don't know what it is, but for me, there seems worse than most years just to be this presence in the air, this heaviness in the air. Am I the only one? Did you feel that? Yeah, some of you? I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer this morning as we go into Advent, but that's where my heart is at this morning. And I suspect I'm not alone in that, and I think that's okay. And so I was scrolling through X, or Twitter, which is never a good idea to begin with, but the odd time you get these little rewards that kind of keep you coming back. And I came across this little thing. It was just somebody posted a picture of this, and I thought, man, that is my sentiment exactly right now. I'm still tired from yesterday's tired. I'm just constantly exhausted, or as the song lyrics say, I am weary. I am part of a weary world, and I just can't seem to get ahead of that. Which brings us to this morning's theme of hope. In the midst of all of this weariness, in the midst of all of this exhaustion, this being beaten down again and again, let's be real, hope can be hard to find, right? Hope can be tough. And so where do we turn for hope when the world around us seems to be imploding? Where do we see slivers of light amidst the darkness? What can we turn to that might, revive us or energize us anew, or give us perspective or insight or even courage to keep going? Well, you know who knew despair pretty good? Is the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah. As we've already read from both Lamentations and the book of Jeremiah, thanks to Jen this morning. I want to kind of return there for a minute as we carry on. But just before we do, I want to provide a little bit of context so you understand why Jeremiah responds the way he does, why he writes an entire book of lament. So Jeremiah is a prophet, and he happens to be writing and hearing from God in the 6th century BC. And the Babylonians had just come in and destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And they had taken his people, fellow Israelites, into captivity, many of them. And so Jeremiah is standing in the midst of this rubble, and he looks all around at his toppled city. And he feels just relentless despair. This is what he writes, and we read this again already, but let me say it again. My soul is bereft of peace. I've forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished, so has my hope from the Lord. So the situation was bleak, and everywhere Jeremiah turned, there was destruction and there was despair. And the Lamentations give expression to this sort of collective grief that both he and his fellow countrymen were experiencing. This is just, they're at the lowest point. You know, they're like in the hole and they're looking up, and it's just, they can't see any way out of this. There is no hope even, he says, in this moment. It is utter despair. And maybe you've been there. You know, at some point, maybe you're there right now. I don't know. There's no sugarcoating those situations. There's no trying to downplay it or to water it down and say, it's not so bad. It is what it is, and it sucks. And so the first thing we can look at this morning is what N.T. Wright says. He says, sometimes there is no answer but lament. Sometimes there is no answer but lament. Sometimes life just sucks, right? And so Jeremiah and Wright here are reminding us that maybe the situation demands us just to acknowledge the hardship, the suffering, the injustice, how unfair things seem, and then to weep with one another before we can move our attention toward hope. And I want to give us permission to do that. I want to give us permission to, we don't have to justify or rationalize suffering. We don't have to do that, because I've tried, and honestly, it doesn't bring a lot of comfort. Sometimes it's just good to sit in the crap and to just accept that. Yeah? And I want to give us permission to do that. That's the first thing. But we can't stay there. And so we see with Jeremiah, we see this just utter despair, right? The whole book of Lamentations speaks to this. There's no hope in that book. It's just like, man, okay, Jeremiah, we get, there's a reason why they called him the weeping prophet. It was rough. Despite the deep despair, however, and his confession that even hope has vanquished, he eventually prophesies this. And this is something happens with Jeremiah. He receives a word from the Lord, and he says this: the day will come when I will do for Israel and Judah all the good things I have promised them. And so Jeremiah is reminding the people of this. He says, in those days and at that time, I will raise up a righteous descendant from King David's line. He will do what is just and right throughout the land. In that day, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will live in safety. And this will be its name: the Lord is our righteousness. And you can almost sense this dawning upon Jeremiah as he reflects on the promise of God, that the story is not over, right? Jeremiah's present circumstance, yes, it's bleak, and even hope may be gone in that moment, as he just, in his vulnerability, confesses, I've even lost hope in the Lord. But there remains for Jeremiah this steadfast trust in the Lord. The steadfast trust that the days are coming in which all of those covenant promises that are plastered throughout the Old Testament, whether it's to Abraham, to Moses, to David, and now this new covenant that is being promised to Jeremiah, that you could read a few chapters earlier, chapter 31, that there's this restoration of things, not just for Judah and Israel, but for all of creation, the whole world. There's this promise that there is something happening, that someone's coming, and things are going to get better. And Jeremiah sees this promise of restoration, this promise of shalom, of peace. And his heart is turned. He goes from despair and he finds hope in that. So for us, the days are coming, this Advent season proclaims, when we will see these promises fulfilled, not just for Jerusalem and for Israel, but for all of us, for all of creation. And so until then, we cling to this hope while living in this, what we've said earlier this summer, we talked about this period of this already but not yet, right? This, Jesus has come already, says Advent, but he's also coming again. So we're in this in-between, right? Peace has been established already. The Prince of Peace has come, and yet we are far, far from peace. New creation has begun at the birth of Jesus. Something new is being done, but new creation has not received its fullness yet. So we are in this in-between, which then raises the question, if we are honest, is it possible to hold despair and to hold on to hope simultaneously? It sounds illogical. It is a contradiction. But can it be done? In other words, can we acknowledge that life is hard, that there may not always be a rationale for the suffering and for the challenges we experience, the challenges that we witness in our news feeds, that we see happening around the world, and then to sit in that awkward reality, the truth of that, to embrace the truth of that, as awful and ugly and difficult as it may be, to sit in that rubble of our lives, the rubble of this world, and cling to the hope of a restored world that began to take shape outside of Bethlehem 2,000 years ago and continues in our midst today. That's the question. And I would say, as followers of Jesus, as Christians, this is really, in many ways, at the heart of our faith. This is the big ask for us. This is what our faith points to. A faith that says that there is more than the story that is going on before our eyes. And I might not see that. Because the world, if you're to contrast, the world has no problem seeing the brokenness and the disrepair of our world. The evidence is overwhelming. But you and I differ in that we acknowledge that brokenness, but then we are beckoned to look beyond it, right? We are beckoned to look at the reality that despite all the evidence to the contrary, to insist, and it is naive, for sure. It is 100% naive. It is also audacious to insist that there is something else happening here, that this is not the end of the story, that our Heavenly Father, through His Son, is working to restore all things. Sometimes it's hard to see that. But this is what we are to fix our eyes upon so that we can in turn bring this hope to the world around us. And so how do we do this? Well, I think it begins with how we understand this word, hope. There are a few different kinds of hope, right? There is improbable hope. So your loved one has stage 4 pancreatic cancer and is on death's door, and you are hoping beyond hope that a miracle is going to happen and he or she is going to be healed. But what happens when he's not? What happens when that doesn't happen? Oftentimes, that faith, there's a crisis of faith that comes from that. That's improbable hope. And then there's more probable hope that's based on reason, that's based on potential. I think of and it's a bit silly, but I think of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Anyone a big Maple Leafs fan here? This is grassroots. These are not typically hockey fans here. But Karen is, that's lovely. And Carol is, that's lovely. So we do have a few hockey fans. But if I were to say the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's been 57 years since they've won the Cup. But there's a chance they'll win the Cup this year. They are third in the league in the highest salary cap. They've got a lot of money, right? They've got superstars. They've got 3 superstars. And I have to look at the names because I don't follow hockey. But Tavares, Nylander, and Marner. You can be like, okay, I can put some reasoning together to say it is at least possible that the Leafs will win the Cup this year, and I can hope for that. And maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you say that, no, that's in the same category as the previous kind of hope, improbable, whatever. But you can at least concede that it is possible for those kinds of things to happen, and I can hope for that. But there's a difference between those forms of hope and how the Bible frames hope. This is how the Bible frames. I really appreciate this. In the Bible, hope is not the anticipation of a positive outcome based on improbable desire. So, we've got a terminal illness and we're just praying that somehow miraculously it's going to happen. That's not necessarily biblical hope, nor even potential reasoning. Well, there's a good case that can be made that Toronto Maple Leafs will win the Cup. That's not how the Bible frames hope. Instead, and this is so important, let me say this. This is our takeaway this morning. Hope in the Bible is based on the anticipation of a positive outcome based on the trustworthiness of God. Based on the trustworthiness of God alone, nothing else. In other words, however outlandish and audacious the outcome might be, or however probable it might be, has no bearing on how the Bible understands hope. Hope is generally framed specifically on how faithful and trustworthy God is. Because if that's true, then it doesn't matter what it is he's promised, we can trust that it'll come to pass. Yeah? Biblical scholar Anna Sieg-Biel, I think that's how you say her name, notes that in the Hebrew Bible, this word chava is often used to convey a sense of waiting or anticipation or expectation or hope. And so translators frequently render it as wait, as in Psalm 37:9 that says, those who wait on or those who hope in the Lord will inherit the earth. But here's the thing, she says. Here's the thing. She says that hope is almost always linked to God's trustworthiness and his faithfulness. Man, if we could just trust that, that would be enough for this morning. If we could just trust God's understanding of hope based on his trustworthiness and faithfulness. And so the Hebrew prophets would discourage placing hope in anything other than God, warning that if you were to trust in foreign nations or in military power or idols, that is all misappropriated hope because that hope is not trustworthy. And the New Testament carries this on as well. Hebrews 6, for instance, talks about, they're just talking about the promise given to Abraham. So a promise from God given to Abraham that all nations will be blessed through him. And it says this, these promises of God are a strong and trustworthy anchor for the soul. Your hope is okay if it's based on the promises of God. Because God is trustworthy and dependable. His promises are not wishful aspirations. Yeah? So then, if the hope that we have is built on God's faithfulness, then first of all, we are allowed to feel despair. We are allowed to name those hardships for what they are. Not to sugarcoat them, not to downplay them or water them down. Just like Jeremiah standing in the rubble of his city, pronouncing utter despair. Absolutely, you're allowed to do that. In fact, sometimes that's what you need to do. The world is weary, it's true. But, like Jeremiah, we can cling to the hope that God is not done with us, and he's not done with this weary world. That despite all the evidence, I'm looking around and everything looks pretty awful right now, God, but I am going to cling to the promise that you are a good God, that you are faithful, and that this is not the end of the story. Yeah? This is what we proclaim as followers of Jesus. This is the gift of Advent to us. And so there is this thrill of hope, the lyrics say, right? The thrill of hope that causes us to rejoice. So as I see it this morning, we have two options in terms of how we encounter Advent as a weary world this year. The first is we can capitulate to it. I think it says that, right? Yeah, good. We can capitulate to it. We can look at the bleak reality that is around us, the despair and the challenges and the darkness, and we can respond to it with defeat. We can sink into a dark, depressing sort of hole of fatalism. And honestly, if you're looking for it, you'll find that. You can find the evidence for that. It's pretty overwhelming, and there's good reason to do so. I'm not denying that. Whatever cause you want to point to be the source of your despair, you can probably build a pretty good case that it's legit. You absolutely can. And I know this because if I'm honest, and I'm being real with you, I would say that this is often where my heart goes. I live in a very sort of fatalistic, you can call it fatalism, it's what it is. I call it realism. I use ways of kind of making it not sound so bleak. I'm just a realist, or I'm a pragmatist, or even this is just, my approach to, it's a strategic approach to, just not being disappointed with things. And so I frame things in such a fatalistic way, and I can live there. You can talk to Rhonda or my family, they'll be like, yes, Dad is like that. And so I know this very well. That is option one. We can do that. We can continue to do that. We can try to cope with platitudes, or just, constantly be searching for the silver lining and not accept the negativity or not accept the darkness as being the reality. That's one option, and it's entirely void of hope, because all the evidence there suggests that hope is in vain. So don't be so stinking naive. Grow up. But I don't think this is the option for Christians, not those who take the call of Jesus seriously in their life. I don't think that's what we're allowed to do. I think God doesn't say yeah, you're allowed to sit in that despair and not move on. No, because that's the point of being a follower of Jesus, is that there is hope. Hope is at the center of our lives, the center of our worldview, the center of our faith. Being a Christian implies that we believe in a God who promises resurrection. Yeah? We believe in a God who promises restoration and renewal. That has to be a part of what we confess. In fact, it has to be a central part of what we confess. And so the second option then is to look to build your hope not on reason, not on probability, not even on audacious improbability, not on some pie in the sky wishful thinking, but to acknowledge that evidence, and then to determine that regardless of what your senses tell you, you will commit to placing your hope in the faithfulness of a God who has made a promise to restore all things. That there is a trustworthiness, a reliability in the character of God that we can place our hopes in. So when he says, behold, as he does in Revelation at the end of the Bible, he says, behold, I am making all things new. Or as Peter says in Acts, that we wait in anticipation for the restoration of all things that is taking place in our midst even now. That we can say, okay, God, let's see it. What are you doing that I can turn my hope to? I want to see what you speak of. I want to trust in you, God, in your goodness. And so I think, in my experience, when we do this, two things start to emerge. There are two benefits to this. One is you begin to have new eyes to see the world. Okay, so what I mean is you start to see light where otherwise maybe you've only ever seen darkness before. So the Ukraine war is a good example. Ukraine war is this terrible, awful reality that we look at in the news and we're just full of despair. And it is that. It is 100% that. It is an injustice there. There are people, civilians, who are suffering, and you could focus on that, and I'm not saying don't pay attention to that. But maybe if you perceive hope grounded in the faithfulness of God, you begin to see slivers of light in the darkness as well. And so, for instance, there's an organization out of Waterloo, a lady, it's called the Waterloo Region Grassroots Response. And at the outbreak of the Ukraine war, this is a woman who looked at this situation, and her response was, I have to do something to step into this darkness, this ugliness. And so she began organizing relief efforts for Ukrainians who are coming to Canada to help them find jobs, to help them find homes and clothes on their back and all sorts of things. And it just kind of kept growing in Waterloo, and volunteers started coming around, and it just kept going and going. And it's this big organization until this summer passed. She came to Thunder Bay and she said, look, we have some volunteers in Thunder Bay. We have families that are fleeing the Ukraine war, and they're coming up to Thunder Bay, and we're wondering, Grassroots Church, are you able to help us in this? And so Sherilyn and I met with the coordinator, and we said, you know what, we'll do the best we can. So one initiative that we did earlier last month was we did a winter coat drive. Many of you in this community donated winter wear to Ukrainian families who have come to Thunder Bay, and household stuff and gift cards and other things. Is it huge? No. But is it like a little sliver of light in this darkness? Absolutely. And so maybe our eyes that are open up get to see things like that now. Yeah. Or, nobody likes talking about the American political situation. It's gross. But I think that's another good example. We can look at the bleakness of the situation south of the border. And yes, it's ugly, and it's shameful even and despairing, but maybe new eyes allow us to see how there are those throughout the entire last couple of years and into today even who are using their privilege, whether it's by economic privilege or their gender or their race or even their religion, who are using their privilege to stand up for those who are oppressed and pushed to the edges. And our eyes start to pay attention to those beautiful stories, and we think like, wow, has this been going on all along? Have I just not seen this? Like, there are moments of hope in the midst of the bleakness. And maybe we just need eyes to see that, to allow us to hold on to hope like this. You can perhaps read it this way. Holding on to the hope God offers reorients us to not ignore the reality of despair, but to see the slivers of light and the beauty that reveal themselves in spite of the reality of despair. So that's the first thing that happens. And then the second thing is, yes, you begin to see this hope with new eyes, but then you begin to embody it. Right? You start to see it in a new light. And we talked about this throughout our rediscovery of the gospel this fall, that a key element of the gospel is this invitation for each of us as Jesus followers to partner with the God of restoration in his renewal of all things. That whether you are an engineer or a school teacher or a stay-at-home mom or a student, your ultimate vocation is to be an agent of healing. Amen? Your ultimate vocation is to be an agent of hope and restoration in this world. We are partnering with the God that we confess to believe in, who is renewing all things. And he says, hey, come be a part of this. And so our hope isn't just to look at things from a distance, but it's to step into it. And this Christmas is a great opportunity. Maybe it happens in small ways in our home, in our families. Maybe it's offering forgiveness to a family member that we just doesn't deserve it, but we do it anyway. It's called grace. Maybe it is having difficult conversations toward reconciliation with one another, right? Maybe it is, maybe it's volunteering with an organization in this community, giving of our time or of our resources, our money, to organizations that are saying this darkness, the despair of life does not get the final word, that I am doing something to speak into that, to stop it. So whether it's with CAS, we have an opportunity as a community to participate in the Children's Aid Society, to bring gifts to those children in our community who know despair quite closely and intimately. Whether it's, Shelter House or RFDA or Grace Place or Roots to Harvest. There are so many good initiatives being done right here in the city of Thunder Bay who are speaking into people's individual lives of despair, and they're saying, you don't get the final word. I am going to help alleviate this to bring hope into your situation. And I want to encourage us, this Advent season, to find areas of suffering, of hardship, and just ask, God, what might I be asked to do in this situation? Is there something you're calling me to here that I can speak into, that I can, with my resources that you've given me, that I can bless someone else with? Let me put this out there. If you are feeling the weight, as I am this Advent, the heaviness of the world's pain and struggle, maybe the proper response is first to acknowledge it. Again, don't water it down. Acknowledge it, lament it, as Jeremiah did, and then lean into it and find a way to alleviate it through partnering with the God who restores in our midst. There's an author, and I'm closing with this, a Canadian author. His name's Jared Siebert, and he, as I was doing some research on this message this morning, I came across this article he wrote for Advent 2018, and he ended the article with kind of this, I'm going to call it an admonition, a challenge. It's a poem, sort of, and I want to read it to you. I'm going to put it on the screen as the band comes up. But, I don't know, maybe there's not much that resonates here with you. Maybe there isn't something, but I think there's going to be a line or two throughout this that might connect with us. So I'm going to read this to you, and I want you just to listen. You are a person that has known suffering. You come from a people that have known suffering. So be a faithful companion to those that are suffering. Keep watch with them. Sit with them, listen to them, sift through the wreckage with them, grieve with them, weep with them. Because of who you are and the people you belong to, you are good company. Consider this also. In the shadow of this empire, there is a growing light. There are people around who are ready to start rebuilding. Think of Jeremiah in the midst of the rubble, right? You are a person who has seen what God sees. You come from a people that are still around because of what God has done. So be a companion in the rebuilding efforts. Roll up your sleeves and pitch in with your neighbors. Bring with you both your hope and your shovel. Ask God to show you how to keep the embers of hope alive. When all seems lost, tell people that you know somebody. Tell them that everything this person touches comes back to life. Tell them that every darkened room this person enters shines with brilliant light. Today, you can form healing partnerships with those that are rebuilding their lives and their neighborhoods. Keep watch, friends. God isn't finished with this world yet. Amen.